Becoming an entrepreneur is a leap of faith. Regardless of when or even if your business sees the light of day, starting up is itself still a tremendously hard thing for someone to take up, work on, and say out loud to the world. That leap of faith still exists when you're a woman founder, but with a bunch of other variables you didn't ask for also thrown in. But I'll tell you what doesn't change. It still takes the same amount of passion. The joy of building, the stress, the frustration, and the ability to manage fires that might go off anytime to keep the ship steady and eventually, hopefully, succeed in the long run. Being a woman founder does present its own challenges and hurdles that are often unexpected and sometimes even patronizing. But if you've decided to jump into the world of terrible and exciting, then these are just some additional hoops that you have to jump through. But that's where role models matter. I must confess, I have been disappointed at not being able to get a lot more women founders and their stories on first principles. You can be sure we're trying to change that over time. But in today's Supercut episode, we bring together 5 women founders from our earlier episodes. First up is Vinita Singh of Sugar Cosmetics, who made it clear how she pushes through pressures on external validation.
So in India, there is such a big notion of this whole, what'll people say when you say you're running
That's right.
XYZ business, right? And to compound that with like still date, I get this thing about you wasted your engineering seat. Like, what did you do about the fact that you were an engineer, and what are you doing now, right? So the pressure to like sort of like create something that people like externally validate is
Validate.
so high. And
And it's harder for women, of course.
and yeah, it's sort of so now I of course joke about it.
Smita Dera of Lead School helped me understand how her journey towards becoming an entrepreneur was a discovery she came across organically when she was teaching her daughter.
My journey towards entrepreneurship was fairly organic because I first started with my kid. I started a reading program with her at the age of 6 months. She was an independent reader even before she could speak. And then I discovered and I learned when I used those techniques that there's nothing special about her. It's just that she was,
She got the stimulus,
yeah,
she
she
got the
got the
environment.
stimulus. And why can't we provide that to more kids?
Ruchi Kalra of Oxizo explained to me how leading with empathy comes naturally when you first respect your people and value them.
I think empathy is something that has to come from within. It's not that you can one day decide that you want to be empathetic towards the people. And if you actually respect your people, if you actually respect what their contribution is, it will automatically come from inside. And that feeling of gratitude in whatever they've contributed would automatically become a way of actually being empathetic when they actually need it the most.
Radhika Gupta of Edelweiss Asset Management made it clear that if you're passionate and ambitious, you should do more to let that be known.
My next transition was in to CEO, and most people have. I was reading a book where most CEOs have a story of what got them there, some big project, some moment, etc. I had mine. Edelweiss was a small mutual fund house. The group had not focused on mutual funds. We had a license. And one day they decided to buy JP Morgan Asset Management. I didn't know about that. When the deal was crystallized, I was called in to run the merger. Um, I had always been saying, I want more, I want more, I need to do more, I need to do more. And that is one thing, by the way, I recommend everyone should just vocalize the fact that you have certain amount of ambition. And I think a day before the merger was
Especially women.
especially women, we just don't do it enough. And we know we don't do it enough. The tragedy is we know we don't do it enough. So I was called in to run that merger. And that merger changed who I am. Because I went from being, as I said, an angry young person who had never managed more than 4 people to someone who was managing an MNC and domestic company merger with 100 people. And I really credit this system for giving someone like me that opportunity because I don't know what they saw in me, except the fact that I wanted to do more.
And finally, Soumya Rajan of Waterfield Advisors revealed how she felt almost apologetic in her early days as a founder.
So, when you introduced yourself, even at a social event or a dinner or any social gathering, you would always kind of say, well, I'm so and so. And the inevitable question is, what are you doing? And you'd say, I am head of the private bank at Standard Chartered. And you began to think of yourself and your identity very much linked to the role. And then when I left Standard Chartered and I started Waterfield, I remember going to several social gatherings at that point. I'd left Standard Chartered, and every time somebody would ask me, so what are you doing? And I would have to say, well, I've just founded this company. It's called Waterfield Advisors. I would always add, I was the head of the private bank of Standard Chartered, almost like of the private bank, almost to kind of establish myself in their eyes. And it took me a long time to get out of that. So it was almost when you use the word apologetic, or I've used the word apologetic, is because I was feeling that I needed to apologize for myself for having done the unthinkable of, being at the peak of my corporate career, to give it all up to move into entrepreneurship. So I felt I had to justify myself to someone else. I've learned, of course, over the years that that's completely irrelevant.
Another thing you'll find as a running theme in this supercut is a common question we often ask on First Principles. What do you think you add most value to your company as CEO? So let's not hold back anymore and let's get started. Welcome to First Principles. I'm Rohin Dharmakumar, your host. Before we get started with the episode, I have an exciting announcement to make that you don't want to miss and would definitely want to let the young graduates in your circle know about. It's about the Young Business Leadership Program, or YBLP, that we launched on the 7th of June. What is it? It is an ambitious and exciting role where we take a handful of talented, ambitious, and eager to learn graduates from India's top colleges and put them through a 2-year program where they will work in different roles and functions at the Ken. And throughout the 2 years, they will learn virtually all key aspects of building, innovating, and scaling a modern journalism as a product organization well from first principles. If you want to understand the why of why we're doing this, I know it's a mouthful, you'll find the details to that in the show notes. But if you're just excited about the opportunity from the little I've told you and you're thinking, how do I apply? You'll find the link to that too in the show notes, no surprise. That's all I had to say. Thanks for listening. Okay, back to the episode. There is a saying, and I've asked this question to other guests also, that we're the average of the 5 people that we spend the most amount of time with. Who are the 5 people that you spend the most amount of time with? I'm assuming Kaushik is one, who's both your husband and co-founder and CEO. So let's
him.
roll that out.
And
who are the next
the
4?
kids.
All right, both your kids.
Yeah, I ended up spending obviously a lot of time with them. And then of course, like my senior leadership, I think because end up being at work like about 12 hours. And there are so many people who've been there from Fab Back days, who've spent almost 7, 8, 9, 10 years in the company. So they're almost like co-founders. And so end up spending a lot of time with them. And then of course I have a bunch of old friends from my IIT days. And I feel that they really have been part of our journey. In fact, we just recently did a friends and family round where we got some of them to come in on board because they've really from picking up the tab where you have no money to pay for a drink when you're at a campus reunion, to sort of being the moral support through all those tough days. So luckily we're still in touch with them and still good friends. So yeah, I have a group there.
All right. From an entrepreneur point of view, if you could go back through your entrepreneurial journey and maybe change one thing, is there something that you would change? Or do differently?
Many things, like many things I would do differently. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole point of all the failures, right? Because you can only learn through them, you never learn through success. So I've had so many failures. I think the biggest I would change is I would build something I'm passionate about early on. I think my first business, I was bootstrapping and I was only optimizing for cash flow. And unfortunately, as an entrepreneur, if you were forced to optimize for cash flow very early on, although it builds great fiscal discipline, it sometimes takes away from that ability to build something which is really meaningful in the long run.
It just becomes a numbers business.
It just becomes a numbers business, and then you start doing too many things too early, and it just becomes like a, like a small boutique services business, and that's how most of us end up. So I feel that if I had the conviction to believe in myself and stay true to what I was passionate about right at the start, which was hard because I was also 23, so I always feel that was all part of the larger plan, I guess. It's hard for a 23-year-old to have that kind of foresight, but I think because I have this thing I'm a marathoner, right? So I have this thing that I will not give up. I don't know when to check out. And that those 5 years were a bit too long for that learning to come through and get imbibed. I think I pushed it too much because I was like, I will not quit. I feel that like the only reason I've succeeded is because of grit. But then sometimes you never know when to, check out.
Very interesting. But grit is great, but you're also saying find your passion and marry it. So it's grit into passion, which is important. And for the first, especially with that business, like, you had grit but no passion, right?
Yeah.
And you're
absolutely.
now saying that what I would do differently, and I would start with passion,
Yeah.
and then marry it with grit,
Yes.
so that I would have like a longer runway.
Longer runway. Yeah.
I want to take this back to another question that you answered early on, which is the cliche about a woman founder starting a cosmetics business. Could it be perhaps that, like, you needed to arrive at your own confidence to start? Because, like, you seem to have started boring businesses up front and not a passionate business. You
Yeah.
should have started a cosmetics business or something else. Like,
Yeah.
you talked about starting like a, I think earlier was the lingerie
yeah,
business,
yeah.
right? My question, I mean, it's a bit of a hypothetical question. There may be other women founders
Yeah.
or potential founders or college graduates who are wondering, this is where my heart is. I
Yeah.
want to start a cosmetics business, but I'm in an engineering college.
Yeah,
I'm an MBA.
absolutely.
I need to start this. And they will also spend that wasted amount of time going through these motions before they
Yeah.
essentially, right? Like,
Absolutely. So in India, there is such a big notion of this whole, what'll people say when you say you're running
That's
XYZ business, right? And to compound that with like still date, I get this thing about you wasted your engineering seat. Like, what did you do about the fact that you were an engineer? And what are you doing now, right? So the pressure to like sort of like create something that people like externally validate is so high, and
it's harder for women, of course.
and yeah, it's hard of so now I of course joke about it. My little one, so he'd gone to stay with my parents for a bit. My kids had gone, and then when they came back, so he said that in school today they asked what do you want to be when you grew up. And apparently he said, I want to be a scientist like my grandfather, not like a dukandar like my mom. So, and I remember, so I was like, did Nanu teach you this thing that I'm a dukandar? But so my dad always jokes about it that you're a dukandar, and that's the thing. And he always says that protein structures and molecules are so exciting, not like cosmetics. And
so it's almost as if you went in the polar opposite direction of your parents, right? And now your children are essentially going the polar opposite direction. Go back.
So my kids don't think this business is cool at all. They think that like research and science is like really cool. And I feel that that whole like everybody goes through this journey of saying that log kya kahenge, in which where if you've studied from a good college, while it's a huge privilege and not taking away from that, it also becomes like this chip on your shoulder where you need to justify it. And if you don't do something that's like probably either AI/ML, or if you're doing something which is a very, very simple business, then you're really not justifying the privilege and the, education that you had, and that pressure is very high. So you're right, actually. And I never thought about it that way. But probably just having the confidence to say, I am running a, makeup company brand, and
Right.
that's it. There is no tech around. It's not beauty tech.
That's
for
right. I mean,
that.
the way I essentially look at it is that if you want to be an entrepreneur, start something that you love.
Yeah.
Even if you fail, you'll still feel good about, I gave it my best.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it while it lasted, right? But if you start something which you don't love, there's absolutely nothing that you'll ever look back
Yeah.
with any kind of
Yeah.
feelings or emotions.
Absolutely. And those fads will come and go, right? There was a time where food tech was everything. 2 years back was edu tech was everything. Like, those are phases which will come and go. What will stay is just you and your company. And when every investor is checked out and nobody's left for you, you should be happy about what you're building, because it's going to take a long time. I think it all boils down to what will I enjoy building for 3 decades? And that question is always very hard to answer early on. But if you're true to yourself, I think you can sort of eventually end up going there.
What do you feel you add most value to Sugar as CEO?
First, I think, is the consumer understanding. I speak to thousands of women in markets, through our D2C platform. We do a lot of consumer interaction calls. And I feel that it's very important, and it's the CEO's job to know the consumer well. So I think that's first. Second is, of course, just energy and optimism. I feel that that's really important to, because any business you're in, it doesn't matter whether it's cosmetics. There are going to be like every good part is going to be followed with a hard part, and you need that one optimist to like keep everything together.
Is there a founder culture at Sugar? Many startups
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
And what's your view on it? I know there's obviously the good part, there's also the bad part,
Yeah.
because of the certain, it's like founders will know better, etc. So what's your views
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
founder culture that
Yeah.
exists in many
Yeah.
startups?
So there's definitely a founder culture at Sugar. In fact, we've, this Kaushik's come up with this framework, and we call it like the 4 H's, like hunger, hustle, humor, and humility. These are the 4 H's that it takes to do well and thrive at an organization like this. And there are a lot of role models who sort of embody that. There is, of course, that whole there is a word in it, hustle, right? Now, hustle is a word which is now, there are two sides.
A bit more loaded than
a
what
bit
it
more
was,
loaded
yeah.
than it was. But it is like Kaushik and I have, we fundamentally believe that you have to work harder than, your competition to get there faster. And it's just, there's no other way. There are no shortcuts. At least we've not experienced any shortcuts. So hustle and hunger is going to be a part of it. And then there's, of course, the humility to not take yourself too seriously, and to be grateful for wherever you come along and celebrate the smaller milestones. Now, yes, is it a good thing, bad thing? It's subjective, but I feel that, in the first 5-7 years, at least, of any startup's journey, it's important for it to be clear what the founder culture is. And then employees have a choice. They want in or out. I think the problem happens if there is a miscommunication where you expect a rosy picture and it turns out to be something else. But as long as an organization, and which is why in our interview conversations, etc., we let people speak to people in teams, etc., to get what the culture is like, because it definitely is not going to be a chill job. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun and a lot of learning, but it's not going to be a chill job. So I feel that as long as there's transparency and people have a choice whether they relate with that founder culture or not, I think that's a good way in the first 5 to 7 years. Once the organization reaches a certain stage, I think if there are certain parts of the culture which are not too scalable and which won't scale well for like 20,000 employees, then that's when you have to get senior leadership to come in and sort of put in a more balanced culture so to say. But I don't think organizations can have a can ever accomplish what like startups can accomplish what a lot of startups do without that founder culture in the first 5-7 years. So otherwise it becomes a lot of mercenaries coming together and just doing something for 2 years and leaving. I feel that what also holds the core team together for decades is their love with that founder culture.
Right. Two of the words that you used in those 4 H's,
Yeah.
hustle and hunger.
Yeah.
Now, those are also, I would argue, both of them are loaded
Yeah.
words, especially with younger employees.
Yeah.
And this is where I would love to, because
Yeah.
you're a brand which is focused on younger women, and
yeah.
you work with a lot
Yeah.
of 70% of your this thing are women and young employees. The motivation to work
Yeah.
harder or
Yeah.
to hustle versus lying flat,
Yeah.
not doing enough, or this is it, no
Yeah.
more, etc. and stuff.
Yeah.
How do you see that playing out
Yeah.
in the workplace, and what's your advice to younger employees entering the work stream, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of experience?
Yeah. I think first 4-5 years are definitely years when most people need to most people figure out what is it that they want to build for the next 2-3 decades, because it's hard at college, right? You don't have, without trying out stuff, you can't. And I feel that it's so, like, yes, Gen Z employees are very different from millennials, and millennials were very different from our parents'
Gen X.
generation, Gen X. And Gen Z are more sorted in terms of just wanting more balance. And I don't know, I mean, in the long run, like, what is right or wrong, but I do feel that the first 5 years, it's if you don't figure out, if you don't work hard and figure out where is it that your passion, and what is it that at the end of the day, it's like, what's the pain that you enjoy over and over, right? So anything that you any time that you want to push your limits, there is a pain that comes. And all of us have this pain, which we, like, for me, for instance, working out is a pain that I love. And it's a part of my journey of realizing my potential. There could be somebody who has a certain hobby, which is a pain that they love, right? So figuring out what is that pain that I would love over the decades is a very important career unlock. And I feel that if you don't work hard in those first 4-5 years, where you discover that thing that you would love to, that pain that you would love to enjoy, then I feel that you may not end up being happy in the long run. And at the end of the day, real happiness, I feel, balance, etc., are certain constructs that people talk about. Real happiness comes from flow, right? The flow that Adam Grant talks about, where you actually, like, talk to people and they say that, oh, what do you want to do on weekends? I want to do Netflix and chill, for instance, right? But if you actually measure their happiness level when they're watching Netflix versus when they're doing something that they're really excited about, even if it's work, like sitting in a meeting on a product development and just iterating and ideating, they would be much happier doing that, because they've discovered their state of flow. So I would definitely, and I speak to a lot of Gen Z colleagues of mine, and I always encourage them to figure out their flow, and where their what is that pain that they would find fun, and not strive for the balance before that happens, because those iterative journeys are always much harder. And of course, that's my advice, and I'm a millennial. In fact, I'm a borderline millennial. So I maybe there's something that I will learn over the next decade about how what clicks for Gen Z. But I don't give advice based on whether somebody's a Gen Z or a millennial. This is something that I feel is what I would teach my kids as well. And I'm also learning that there are different approaches to how people feel about their careers. So I've also come a long way from understanding that, like, for instance, the whole remote culture is something that came around over the last 2 years, and it worked.
Both of you are working for one of the world's most well-known retail FMCG companies, long known for innovation, with a lot of structures and processes behind it, leadership, grooming, etc., to a completely new sector like education, where, granted, Sumit's parents may have been teachers, but neither of you had any experience. What made the two of you think that you could be entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, in a space you had absolutely no idea about?
Yeah. See, now this is interesting. So, one thing about both of us is that we both believe and take a lot of joy in learning. And we don't get stopped by things that we don't know. In fact, the more we don't know, the more intrigued we are, the more we're wanting to do something about it. I think here, uh, Sumit's passion at that point was how can I change the way education is in this country? What can I do about it? My passion at that time was I actually continued with PNG when we moved to India. My passion was I'm going to be a parent. What is it that I can do for my child? What opportunities can I bring for my child? And I think we both were so passionate about these respective things that we researched and we read and we built skills around it. We did not let it stop us that we don't know. Secondly, entrepreneurship for both of us was not necessarily something that we planned will happen. It was, I would say, in some ways, at least for me, I would say it was out of compulsion. Compulsion because there was a problem I was seeing in front of me. I was not seeing solutions that could systemically solve that problem. And hence I said, hey, I just need to roll up my sleeves and jump in and see how far I go. So entrepreneurship is not something that I planned. It happened to me, and it's been a great learning experience and continues to be. So there's a lot of joy.
So, all this is valid, and I'm going to insert one of the questions that one of our listeners has sent, which I think is very important. How did you find your first 10 or 20 colleagues when you started, considering that both of you were coming from a completely different country, completely different organizations? Who were the first? You did not have existing anchors in education or ed tech, whatever you want to call it. So, how did you find your first 10 or 20 colleagues?
I'll bridge a little bit before I answer that question more specifically. See, we came back in 2007, and the lead journey began in 2012. So over those 5 years, both of us had our own paths. Sumit joined this company called Zlearn
So,
as the
there was a
CEO. Yeah,
precursor.
there was a precursor. So he joined that company as the CEO. He took it. He really scaled that company, took it to listing, and that allowed him a lot of learning. In the meantime, of course, we developed an ecosystem of friends and people who were educators and who came from this space. I actually did a lot of side consulting assignments, but essentially from 2007 to 2010 immersed myself in early childhood learning. So it sounds crazy to people, but I
Was that
started
because you were a parent or
because
because
I
you were
was a
preparing
parent.
yourself for
Because I was
entrepreneurship?
a
No.
parent, and I
All
think
right.
my journey towards entrepreneurship was fairly organic because I first started with my kid. I started a reading program with her at the age of 6 months. She was an independent reader even before she could speak. And then I discovered and I learned when I used those techniques that there's nothing special about her. It's just that she was,
She got the stimulus,
yeah,
she
she
got the
got the
environment.
stimulus. And why can't we provide that to more kids?
What's the split of responsibilities between you and Sumit as co founders?
So it's been very organic with time. We've picked up things that needed to be picked up, and one of us just picked it up. But at least now, because we're a large organization, and the way we've split it is, or rather, at least there are some things we do in common. So we are co-CEOs now. Actually, that is also not a very common construct in India, is what I realized. So what that means is that there are certain strategic things and decisions we make together. We both think very differently, and hence we find it works better if we make these decisions together versus one person making it. Those are largely in terms of long-term strategy, next year strategy, goals, and things like that. I work a lot more with the product curriculum teams, and also basically all the central functions like finance, supply chain, all of these enabling functions. Sumit leads more of the direct functions in terms of his business teams, sales, field sort of functions tend to report to him. But now we have a leadership team, and many of them are independently handling their mandates. So we're not
What's
as
your span of
operational.
control? How many people do you have who report
I
to you?
think out of 1,500, from a structural reporting point of view, it would be half and half.
No, I mean, like, how many people directly report to you?
How many people directly report to me? See, right now is not a great time to ask me that question, because I have
Reorganization?
I have one or two. I'm one or two CXOs short right now, so I'm pretty much playing those roles. But yeah, I think I have 15, 16 people directly reporting to me, and Sumit also would have that. But in an ideal situation, I would say it should be 6, 7 people.
If
7
I were
leaders
to
should be
ask your
reporting to me.
direct reports to describe you using one adjective, what do you think might be the most common one that they'd use?
Very detail oriented. I think that's what they'll say.
What is it that you feel you add most value to lead as a co-founder and co-CEO?
I think I bring I would say two things or three things. I think one, I just live the mission all the time. So does Sumit, but I think I'm always the voice in the room on, hey, how is this helping the child? Or this might be good business, but how is this helping the child? And I think that is the voice I always bring in every conversation. So I think that is one. I've never let us deviate from there. I am a missionary. Now, what that means is I do fundamentally believe that only if we deliver outcomes will we make money. And I cannot imagine a single situation where I have to choose money over outcomes. That's a choice I won't make. Because whenever the team feels we need to make the choice, I always will say, oh, well, we have to think harder. We're missing something here because we've got to deliver both. So I would say that is one. Second is I never give up. I just never give up. And hence, through all the good times or bad times, I'm the one also who's saying, okay, so let's just work through it. And I will roll up my sleeves and get in. That is also why they call me detail oriented, because I have the capacity to go in very deep in multiple things. So of course, my team does joke about the fact that you can't get past half baked stuff with Smita because she won't let it go. She will dig in and then she'll dig in, and so I think that is the other thing, and that whether you call it diligence or whether you call it deep thinking, I think that does bring out good quality thinking. So we're a little more prepared as we move forward. And yeah, third is, I mean, right now I'm the acting CFO, so I'm the money manager and I ensure the capital allocation happens well. So I also find ways for them to save money.
You've raised a lot of money for lead. I'm sure that came on the back of a lot of conversations with investors that ended up with them saying, not getting back to you or saying, no, we will not invest.
Absolutely.
When you
Lot
look
more
back,
rejections. Yes.
when you look back at those rejections, what are some of the learnings that you'd like to give away to other entrepreneurs?
I think every rejection is a very important learning moment. I think my in fact advice to entrepreneurs is that uh, often I see entrepreneurs look at that rejection as sort of externalizing the issue, that they don't get it, they
Could you
don't
be more specific
understand.
without going into details of
Uh,
any particular investor? I mean,
no, like
something
for
that.
example, I've heard entrepreneurs say that, oh, that investor doesn't get it.
No,
Oh,
no,
there
no. I
is
meant
this thing.
with
Yeah.
your own experiences
Hmm.
with lead. Some of the investors who chose not to invest in you, when you reflect back on those, is there something that you could have done differently? I mean,
See, I
are there any
think,
reflections from there?
yeah, so see, it was a learning journey, right? Now, in that learning journey, one part of that learning journey was it is very important to understand their worldview and your worldview. And if they do not match, then you anyways don't belong together. Now, when you're listening to their worldview, uh, think about whether there are bits for you to take away because it's expanding your worldview. There have been some interesting thoughts that have come up in those conversations, which are now part of the lead journey. Every bit of those conversations have made us richer, I would say. Sometimes the worldviews are very different. The example I take is some investor, actually, he was very kind enough to write to us and say that you should change your business model from B to B to B to C, because no one has ever made a big business with schools. And we very politely, shared that we appreciate your care that you've written to us. Our worldview is different. Our worldview is that schools is where transformation is needed. And just because others have not succeeded does not mean no one can succeed, because we're not willing to give up on this, and we continue. And that, I think, gave us energy, that there are non-believers, and I don't wrong them, but they're non-believers, and we move on. So I think there are multiple things that we've learned. There are lots of questions that they ask you sometimes on your business model. There are people who've looked at our business model and at different phases have told us, you guys are not ready for us because this needs to be improved. That was very valuable input. The global benchmarks, actually, that we started learning from, came through investor conversations. It was a good investor friend who first heard our model and then said, oh, this sounds like X company in Brazil. And we were like, oh, we've never heard about it. And when we eventually connected with it is this company called Arco in Brazil, and when we connected with the Arco founder, Ari, like, our stories were as if, like, we say kumbh ke mele mein, but siblings are we like,
Right.
my God, identical stories, just over 2 generations there. His parents used to run a school, and then he created a system out of it, and we just did it in a shorter lifespan. And there was just so much to learn. Now, that investor never eventually invested in us, but I think opened a world of things for us to learn. So there are a lot of things on unit economics, on the model, on scaling, that we've learned through these investor conversations and these rejections. So yeah, so I think I was just making the point that sometimes, and I get asked this question sometimes, that, oh, do you, it's a very cliched question, but asked often. Did you feel that you were rejected because of your gender? I was like, actually, I didn't feel it because I never looked at it through that lens. So even if someone rejected me because I was a female entrepreneur, I would never know. And I don't care for it, because I don't think there's any learning for me there. I'm not changing my gender. I'm the same person. So if someone has rejected me for that, it's their problem. But there is no point of trying to look at it through that lens. So I've never looked at it through the lens of, oh, they don't get it, or is it because of gender, or is it because of bias? No, it is not. Someone is not resonating with you. Try and understand why. Take out what is there for you to learn and move on.
As both a CEO and a co-founder, how do you train yourself to avoid self-reinforcing bubbles? Because the privilege of within the organization, you are both the CEO and the co-founder. Actually, the co-founder, like you're connected to both businesses. So what you believe in and what you think will tend to become very strong, like and like, does that happen, that like do you force yourself to kind of tell people to come and tell you you're wrong, or
Yeah.
like this, like, so is there a method? Do you see that happening actually?
So first of all, we actually stayed away from any kind of designations for a really long time. Like, you would not see in the initial 4-5 years anybody as CEO for off business. It was just actually this designation also evolved with the fact, because we split out the two companies, and obviously we reached a scale that we have to, because all of us had more of our individual roles, right? I still do something that I used to do 5 years back, right? So it's not that if all payments have to go through, it does too through, right? Bhuvan still actually codes, Ashish still does lead all collections, and Nitin still does the running around. Vasant has been like, sales में बैठेगा नहीं तो मजा नहीं आएगा, right? So I think because we have whatever we were doing right from the start, we have some portion of that role. So we are more, in a way, employees of the company, right? Not just leaders of the company. We have our own thing to do on a daily basis. And that keeps us more grounded, because that keeps us closer to the fact that what is the reality check, rather than sitting on the top and saying this is what it is. So we've not actually hired a professional CEO. We've not hired, because all of us, it's just that ground up. Now coming back to your point in terms of does it become self-reinforcing as to whatever we're saying is the right thing or not? I think that healthy tension between the five of us is great, right? We have, like, me and Ashish have a very different way of thinking. So sometimes he has to tell me that I'm wrong. Sometimes I have to call out that, this doesn't make sense, or this agenda needs to be pushed more. And sometimes, for that matter, Bhuvan or Nitin or Asad will do it. And not just five of us, by the way. It will be the same thing for the next set of leaders that we have for each of the businesses. They get their own flexibility to make their own decisions. But there are a lot of things that are committee driven decisions for us, right? It is not, means, a lot of the decisions, whether it comes to credit, whether it comes to general. So it's a very inclusive way of decision making. It's not a founder led decision.
What are your 2-3 most critical meetings in a week?
I would say a lot of the reviews, mostly around the reviews, right? Which could be whether it's a sales review, whether it's on the off business side, there will be some review. So most of us are in form of some of those things, and at that thing, I think those will be
Review meetings, so 2 to 3 review meetings per week.
would be the most critical review.
What kind of people do you find it most difficult to work with, and why?
For me personally, I think if someone is not hardworking enough and is trying to get the easy way out by talking through, I find it very hard. I think Ashish is much better off that way, is to be able to actually get work done from different set of people and different skill set. I actually am quite anal about the fact that give it your best, okay, and yeah.
How do you maintain empathy towards people while still pushing them to get work done?
Um, I think empathy is something that has to come from within. It's not that you can one day decide that you want to be empathetic towards the people. And if you actually respect your people, if you actually respect what their contribution is, it will automatically come from inside. And that feeling of gratitude in whatever they've contributed would automatically become a way of actually being empathetic when they actually need it the most. So I think it just happens, the fact that but I think if you start expressing your gratitude towards people, that empathy will start coming in yourself, right?
What is the most underrated cultural aspect that a workplace must have? The most underrated.
As in, give me
Like something which actually is very important, but not enough people recognize and call it out as so. Is there anything that exists like that at off business which you don't see talked about that much in other businesses, but you feel it exists at off business or Oxyzo?
I think I see that that sense, at least in the, I mean, I can definitely say for the initial folks which were there in the first 4 years, 5 years, right? As saying that it's the company. I mean, it's not, they're not doing it for me, or they're not doing it for Bhuvan or Ashish, or maybe their immediate boss, right? We call it being company first. We say company first very lightly, that you should be company first. But I think it gets ingrained from the fact that if you have a shared celebration about where the company is, if you have a shared disappointment with what has happened, in terms of if you say lost some money somewhere, I mean, if it pinches the next to next layer, that means they're thinking about the company. If they have the guts to come and say, ki, dekho, maybe that person is not agreeing in the top team, but ma'am, this is right to be done. They'll find a way to figure out how to get the right thing done for the company. I think that's for me.
Do you have any metrics that you look at to track your culture? How you're doing as an organization from a culture point of view?
So for me, I love the fact that whenever there's this, we are 7 years old. So whenever there's this wishing someone a 5th anniversary, 6th anniversary, and 7th anniversary. People have stayed with you, people who are old, who've been there. And for me, that automatically gives me so I won't say I have a real metric that I track, right? There is HR tracking attrition, there is a lot of those things, right? For me, as I find familiar faces, familiar people who've and those anniversary tickers coming in, and even people who've been there like 3 years, 4 years plus, I just get a sense of satisfaction. For me, is the fact that if you're staying within the organization, you're doing well, then the organization as whole is doing well. So for me, and that's what it is. But yeah, as you grow, there are different set of noises which start coming in, and I think it's a collective responsibility of all top 20 people to figure out a way around those noises.
How do you know that? How do you assess the state of your current culture? Like, how do you know whether you're doing better than last year? Because for someone who's so numbers driven and metrics obsessed and stuff like that, what I'm trying to understand is that what would be your lead indicators to observe changes in culture, not lag indicators, like stuff that you talked about, like attrition, retention, etc., would in some senses be lag indicators. How would you know that's at some point if you need to intervene at a cultural level?
Actually, it's an interesting question. It's just that we are so self-obsessed with the fact that we are where we are because of our culture, and it's more of a satisfaction deep within, because saying that okay, you'll get people very young in their journey, they'll grow with you as leaders, etc. That formally, honestly, it's not a metric that I have right now. But now that you push me for it, I should think about it for sure. I'm
Yeah,
just being
because the
honest.
thing is that
I'm just being
when
honest
things are
here.
good, you will not
Yeah.
notice when they
Yes,
start fraying,
yes,
and
yes,
it's
yes.
lag
So
indicators.
I
only
think
catch it.
sometimes if you think that people can directly pick up the phone and call you, saying that this is not happening right, this is not how we were. Sometimes you convince them this is the new way of doing it. But if you keep getting some of those calls, you feel that you're at least connected to the organization. I think that's most important. But now that you say it, I think that's a to-do for me for sure.
To coming back to your career ladder, you came back, set up Forefront Capital with Nalin and another co-founder.
Yes.
And you ran that for 4 years. And
I
then,
ran that about 4.5 years before we sold it to Edelweiss.
so that's your next transition. You've now gone from a founder, co-founder, to now acquired, but an employee of a much larger organization. What was the transition like?
It's actually tougher than you would think it would be. And
I don't think it would be easy at all. I'm sure
no,
it
so
must be.
people told me selling was a bad idea because they said, you are foreign educated, you have worked for big global brands, you're going to join some Lala company and they'll eat you alive. So I always joke with Rashesh, I was like, nobody has eaten me, thankfully. And none of that was there, actually. I think this whole entrepreneurship and not being your own boss and all, I think this is all hogwash. One, in life, everyone has a boss. Your customers are your boss. Your regulators are your boss. So nobody lives in a life where your
investors are your boss.
Someone is your boss. I genuinely think that if you believe you're living a life with no stakeholders, no, and in today's generation, there is no boss-employee relationship. By the way, I can't get my 1-year-old to listen to me. Do you think because of some hierarchy that HR has set, I can get someone to do something for me? This is all hogwash in today's generation. So nobody is bosses. But I struggled with it because reality is I had been an entrepreneur for 5 years. You don't have performance reviews. You don't have peers. You don't have any of that, right? And I think I mentioned this in my book, but I think being a young entrepreneur in India had made me very agitated. It's not an easy thing to do, right? Entrepreneurship is hard. It's hard in an industry like financial services, which is very age conscious. And, it's a young woman also. So I was like aggressive out there. And in a corporate, there's a lot more you have to do. You have peers, you have reviews, you have to manage your emotions. In fact, one of the earliest feedbacks I was told in 2015 was that I am god awfully immature, emotionally immature. Like emotional maturity is one of the things that's going to hold you back. And I'm glad someone told me.
Sorry,
this.
who told you this?
One of
and
my
when?
bosses told me this.
At what stage of your career?
I think 2015, 1 year after I sold the business. I was in tears in my first performance review when I was getting feedback. I was trembling and I was in tears. I had to run out of it. I would get angry with people. I would write signs on my desk saying, Radhika, don't blow up. It just came out of a feeling of entrepreneurship, a financial struggle that you go through as an entrepreneur. I mean, very few people talk about this, but you live on Wall Street, you're making a certain amount of money after roughing it out in college. You move back to India, and I know I come from a lot of privilege, and you're living in this tiny house and slumming it out or struggling it out. I don't know what the words are, especially when your classmates are all working industrialist kids. It sucks. It
Or
affects you.
those of them who chose to stay back at McKinsey
Yeah, all
and
those.
like
Well, see, you don't care about those guys in the US because in the US, regardless of who your father is, all of us lead the same lives, right? We're all taking the New York subway. We're all meeting at the same places for dinner. We're all working 18 hours at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or wherever. There's no sense of inequality. When you come back to India, you start to feel that inequality and it hits you hard. So all of this had built up in me, and that's why I became what I did. Uh, and so my first year or two was very difficult settling down, and not difficult for business. Business was doing really well. It was growing, etc., etc. It took me time to find my feet here.
and then your next transition was to CEO in 2017.
My next transition was in to CEO, and most people have. I was reading a book where most CEOs have a story of what got them there, some big project, some moment, etc. I had mine. Edelweiss was a small mutual fund house. So the group had not focused on mutual funds. We had a license. And one day they decided to buy JP Morgan Asset Management. I didn't know about that. When the deal was crystallized, I was called in to run the merger. Um, I had always been saying, I want more, I want more, I need to do more, I need to do more. And that is one thing, by the way, I recommend everyone should just vocalize the fact that you have certain amount of ambition. And I think a day before the merger was
Especially women.
especially women, we just don't do it enough. And we know we don't do it enough. The tragedy is we know we don't do it enough. So I was called in to run that merger. And that merger changed who I am. Because I went from being, as I said, an angry young person who had never managed more than 4 people to someone who was managing an MNC and domestic company merger with 100 people. And I really credit this system for giving someone like me that opportunity because I don't know what they saw in me, except the fact that I wanted to do more.
And that unlocked the path.
And that completely unlocked the path. And later I put my hand up again, once again, and said, if you need a mutual fund CEO, I'm here, I'm here. And I had all these Bachchan-like dialogues that said, I may not have any experience, but I love this business more than anyone else will.
It's interesting you should mention Bachchan because just a few minutes ago you were saying angry young person and I
Angry
was
young
thinking
woman,
angry
yeah.
young woman and now you've made the Bachchan reference.
And now I've made the Bachchan reference.
You've talked about the fact that women leaders are often judged
Yeah.
for their looks, for how they sound. You talked about the fact that, I mean, even though you say it was valid feedback, but I think one of the feedback that comes is you're too emotional. Whereas the fact, I mean, it remains that women have higher EQ as leaders as well.
A man swears on the floor and no one will say anything, but a woman cries and suddenly she's emotionally immature.
In fact, one of the things on this podcast that I've been always been conscious of is that when I'm speaking with women leaders, I understand that a woman leader who's speaking on a podcast and says something funny, flippant, etc., will be judged for it much more harshly than a male leader who does the same. So this is very much a reality. What's your mantra for, or what's your advice for other women leaders and professionals to not get consumed and overcome by this? This exists. There's no denying it.
Option one, have a thick skin, and thick skin is only built over time. I am the most sensitive person on earth. As a child, I would tear up the drop of a hat. I won't say I'm thick skinned, but I am significantly more thick skinned. The second is, at least in my position, I've started to call it out because I know. So a few days ago, I had given my opinion on some topic. I don't even remember. And someone, yeah, I had written something about Nadi in a sari and, women being judged for their looks, and the whole ISRO thing happened and Chandrayaan happened. And I said, the modern Indian woman is in a sari and sari doesn't mean behenji. And I was trolled by some people. That's fine. Someone decided that they're not going to just criticize my opinion. They said Radhika Gupta's opinions are as twisted as her squinted eyes. Then I call this stuff out because you can't do that. And I actually wrote, I was like, in my head, I think I look very nice. And the reason I write things like this is because women are judged for their looks. So I think it's important to call out. I call out incidences of bias. When I was pregnant, I did this many times. I call out incidences where I'm judged and I confront it. It's the same kindergarten thing that we started the podcast with. If you stole my pencil, I'm entitled to ask you why I did it, why you did it.
That's great advice. The things that you said about developing a thick skin or being confident enough to call out something that happens over time, right? Like it takes you a certain number of years to evolve there. I'd like to take you back to that conversation that you had with the boss that left you in tears. At that point, now on reflection, you're saying that that was good because it allowed you to understand how you needed to evolve. But at that point in time, you potentially had two paths in front of you. One of the paths that could have been taken was that this was inappropriate, this was targeting me, and I need to do something about it. The other one that you seem to have chosen, is that, like, I mean, there was validity as well, right? What's your advice for, I think, women leaders and professionals early on in their career when they get adverse advice like this? Because it can be hard to get a sense of, was this valid critical feedback, or was this, like, for instance, I couldn't figure out if you were being given feedback about your emotional regulation as because you were a woman, or because you truly needed that feedback. I mean, as a layperson, I couldn't make out. So how do you reflect on that incident today?
Think about if your mother gave you the same feedback, would you feel bad about it? Separate the critic and
Our
the
parents never give us good advice when it comes to profession, and they never truly open with us. The
no,
goes
but
back to the
I tell
original
you,
point.
you have to separate the critic and the criticism. And I have learned to take aside the criticism and look at the intent, जैसे नियत कहते हैं, of the person. And in this case, the person who was giving me this feedback was very invested in my career.
That's very
He,
useful.
in fact, when he gave me the JP Morgan merger, and when that merger happened, I didn't know how to manage people. I didn't know how, I was terrified of public speaking. He would call me into his cabin while he was having lunch and just give me 30, 40 minutes of people management gyan from his own experience. This is someone who managed 2,000 people. He didn't need to do that. He was doing it because he cared for me.
So that criticism was coming from that
right
place.
He once made me, he was supposed to deliver an integration speech to this audience of 100 people and at a big offsite, and he disappeared and he said, Radhika, you need to make the speech, despite the fact that I was terrified of a mic. He did it because he wanted to push me. And so I have learned to identify what is trolling. Like the dude who's talking about my twisted eye, he's a troll. He's mean. He doesn't care about me. He's targeting me. But this person was not targeting me. And that would be my advice. Separate the critic and the criticism.
All right. My last question on this topic is, how do you handle mansplaining?
I'll tell you a story. I was 7 months pregnant and I was part of something industry related, and some guy came to me and said, don't be on this conference call on a Saturday because you need rest. And I was like, what the? First, I was very angry. Then I actually called it out. I said, listen, I'm pregnant. I'm not sick. You're not my husband or father, not that they can tell me this thing. And if I need medical help, support, or rest, I will take it. And incidentally, by the way, a pregnant woman can answer the phone. please add me back on this conference call. That's how I handle it.
I want to talk about, like, so you've said, again, I love change. In fact, I thrive in chaos. Um, I get the sense that you as a leader are are driven by conflict, chaos, confusion, disruption, etc. You seem to be more of a wartime CEO than that, for that notion of the peacetime versus wartime CEO. Uh, do you see yourself that way? And do you imagine what if things were peaceful and if things were calm? Would you be the same person that you are?
I've never reflected on that, but if I had to, I think a certain amount of disruption, a certain amount of chaos, confusion I don't like. I think I'm very clear headed.
What's the difference? Sorry, I mean, you said chaos. You said I don't like confusion. To you, what's the difference between chaos and confusion? Because to a layperson, they couldn't sound like synonyms.
Disruption, chaos are external factors to me. They are things that happen outside your industry. Confusion is I don't know where I'm going. I don't know my business. Confusion is internal. And the last, I want to be very clear. In fact, I believe internally, your operating model should be simple, clear, communicated well, so that you can handle the chaos and disruption of the outside world. That's the framework that I operate in. Internally, things, internal politics, internal poor org structures, once they are there, they weigh you down. They're again like your MBA politics, they weigh you down. You will not be able to build a marshmallow tower, because the reality is in all industries, there is external disruption, and asset management in an industry as regulated as asset management and as dynamic as capital markets, you cannot live without disruption, and the market disrupts itself. So I like that. That's the kind of person
yeah, so
I
I
am.
get that now. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong. Your operating model is internal clarity and conviction in the face of external chaos, disruption, odds, constraints, etc. So if I allow me to rephrase my question now, right? What if it's internal clarity versus external calm? Have you ever imagined yourself in such a situation
Have I ever imagined myself in a
where
situation of,
things externally are also perfectly calm and relaxed?
I've never had one. I wouldn't mind it for a while. I wouldn't mind it. Because I think sometimes you just need to build. I've never had that. So I keep joking that I've never thought of myself as a wartime CEO, but I've always been a startup head. I mean, I worked in AQR Capital, which was not a large established. Outside of McKinsey, I've never worked in a large established outfit. And every time a new AMC starts in this country, I seem to be the one in the news, even though, I am not going anywhere. And I think it's because I am one of those startup. Fundamentally, without being a startup person, I have become a startup person.
Also because you're more outspoken and out there. And I think, again, it comes back to that point about there is a cost that women leaders pay for being outspoken and out there. As CEO, what is it that you feel you add most value to Waterfield Advisors?
I think the vision. I think that's one. The ability to have that upfront and stated. The other, interestingly, Rohin, I found that even leadership styles have had to evolve. In the early days, it was always about leading from the front. When I
Rolling
now,
up your sleeves, doing whatever it took.
whatever it took, so that you're kind of there, you're in it, you're with them, you're with the troops, and everyone is out there to garner business. When I think about what it has to be going forward, I think of it more like leading from behind, or basically as a shepherd, because now you have a situation where you've got senior people in the right roles to take the business forward, and your role is more about keeping the flock together. so that there are no kind of if somebody is straying, how do you bring them back into the fold? So I've even sensed as an entrepreneur, my own leadership style has had to change from leading from the front to actually now saying, okay, I'm going to lead like a shepherd from behind.
Was that hard? Because that transition sometimes isn't easy for founders who
Very
are
hard.
used to being hard charging in the trenches.
Very, very hard, because you always, or maybe it's just me as a personality, you want to be more in control. And I can tell you that for me, I'm a bit of a perfectionist.
I was about to add perfection. You
Yeah.
added it yourself.
And that's very hard to be able to say it doesn't have to be 100% right. It's okay if it's
Someone else needs to do it 80% for them to
80%.
discover it, how to
Exactly,
take it to 100%.
exactly. But that's a mental shift that I've had to make. It's not been easy, but I also realize, and even now, I won't even say that I'm there. I will say that it's a journey for me as an individual to let go a little and to make sure that I can allow the others to develop and let them have the journey that I've had in the past.
One of the things that came up in our research, something that you said, was in your early entrepreneurship days, you were almost apologetic, and it took you some time before entrepreneurship liberated you from the need to be associated with a role. What does that mean? I mean, it sounds very interesting, right? Apologetic and the need to be liberated from a role. What did you mean?
So when I looked at my time in Standard Chartered, it was always about a designation and a company. So when you introduced yourself, even at a social event or a dinner or any social gathering, you would always kind of say, well, I'm so and so. And the inevitable question is, what are you doing? And you'd say, I am head of the private bank at Standard Chartered. And you began to think of yourself and your identity very much linked to the role. And then when I left Standard Chartered and I started Waterfield, I remember going to several social gatherings at that point. I'd left Standard Chartered, and every time somebody would ask me, so what are you doing? And I would have to say, well, I've just founded this company. It's called Waterfield Advisors. I would always add, I was the head of the private bank of Standard Chartered, almost like of the private bank, almost to kind of establish myself in their eyes. And it took me a long time to get out of that. So it was almost when you use the word apologetic, or I've used the word apologetic, is because I was feeling that I needed to apologize for myself for having done the unthinkable of, being at the peak of my corporate career, to give it all up to move into entrepreneurship. So I felt I had to justify myself into someone else. I've learned, of course, over the years that that's completely irrelevant. But at that time, I still felt a bit of that. And I don't know whether it's because of just social conditioning. But when you become an entrepreneur, the second part of your question on your liberating yourself from the role, that's exactly what happened. I was able to see myself for who I am and my strengths, my weaknesses, and to say, what am I going to build based on who I am as a person and my values and the ideals that I have, not linked to my previous employer. And I think that was a huge mental change and shift that I did. And perhaps it's a little unique in my situation because of the conditioning for so many years of being in the corporate sector. It was 17 years in the corporate sector, and then stepping out to be an entrepreneur.
Not really, Swami. I mean, I'll take you back to something that you said earlier as well. You said while you were at Standard Chartered, the world was Standard Chartered, and like, the org chart, the people that you're familiar with. I mean, my theory is that when we are in large, well known organizations, their brand and their ecosystem is so strong and powerful that it kind of
suppresses our need to develop our own identities, because you ride on those. You go to a meeting, like you rightly said, the brand opens doors.
Correct.
When somebody asks you, what do you do? And typically, I mean, in most meetings, people ask, where do you work? They don't ask you, who are you or what do you do, right? So when you take that away, like you rightly said, that's when your identity as an entrepreneur flourish. So I think a
Absolutely.
lot of us have gone through that in the early years. A lot of us, me included, have felt apologetic because you're, I don't know why, but you are a kind of apologetic, right? Yeah, I'm doing this, and then it's this. And then when you sense the, recognition not coming from the other person of what it is, then you say, I used to do this earlier, right? Because you're trying to do that.
Absolutely.
Still sticking with entrepreneurship, you said that it was hard in the early days to be taken seriously as a woman entrepreneur. Where does that come from? And I mean, how do we change it?
So when I say it was difficult to be taken seriously as a woman entrepreneur, I really meant it in the context, Rohin, of not just building a business which was a mom and pop shop, or the equivalent of a woman being an entrepreneur tends to sometimes the the significance of it is more as a solopreneur or somebody who's just
Small business,
a small
hobby
business,
business.
a hobby business. It's not something serious
Lasting.
or lasting. And I think when I said I was not being taken seriously, it was because I sometimes felt that they thought, or whoever I met or I spoke to, oh, this is just another hobby. She just wants to just do something to fill her time. So the fact that the intent was to actually build a business which was a big business and a global business was something that I always imagined for myself when I started Waterfield. In fact, one of the reasons I even called it Waterfield and gave it, I remember somebody asked me, why are you not giving it an Indian name? And I said, well, I really have aspirations for this to be a global brand. So I didn't want an Indian name, which I thought people may find difficult to pronounce later. So I said, let's make sure that it was something that it could be more widely held, just a widely accepted name. But I just felt at that time that people thought it was a hobby. And whereas my desire, the ambition, was to build something which was much, much bigger.
Have there been instances where that's worked to your advantage, where this has allowed you to kind of stay under the radar and not be seen as a serious long term rival, because people think that this is just a short term business that Soumya is doing, and we don't have to take it as seriously?
Perhaps in the early stages, I think for a lot of my competitors, they would have felt that, oh, she's just building another wealth management company. She's not going to get very far. Indians are not going to pay fees. It will have its own mortality sooner than later. I certainly don't think so now. I think they're much more watchful, wary of what we're building. And more than anything else, I think they recognize the fact that I have stayed true to the belief of what I think is correct and right for the client. And they do recognize that we pioneered a very new business in the country.
What are some of the stock responses that your colleagues might hear from you if they come to you with a problem that you feel that they need to be fixing?
So in the early days, I would try and help them problem solve. Partly because of just the way I am in terms of not letting go. So it would always be about, okay, how can we fix this? And then talk through the process of how do you fix this. More recently, it's been about, well, if this is a problem, then can this problem be solved amongst your peer group? Does it need to come to me? And if you can solve it within the peer group, then do that. So it's about pushing back a little. So today, I think most of them realize that they really can't come to me unless it's something which is, definitely something that I need to take a decision on or intervene in. So, but it's all about the process of letting go.
How many people report to you? What's your span of control?
I have a very large span of control right now. It's close to about 14, which is
Which is large. Out of 120,
crazy,
14 is large.
which is absolutely crazy. It's also because many of the sales, the relationship managers report into me directly, and that works and it doesn't work because, again, part of it works because advisory is new, and therefore even to know how to pitch and how to work with the client is something that I feel that if I can give these individuals an insight of how to do that relationship management well, they in turn can take it down to their
So it's a
teams.
transitionary.
It's a transition, but I think I would think that not more than 5 is really the ideal number.
What is the one thing all of your direct reports will agree about you?
Apart from the perfectionist, I think they will also say that positive mindset, and they would also say that she has her heart in the right place.
What does that mean?
I would never want to do something that may hurt another individual, or it's not acting at any cost. It has to be an action that keeps in mind the other person as well. It's almost like, and that actually becomes difficult as a leader, because the thing is that you may have to take decisions which are not always easy. But for me to get to that point of taking those very hard decisions means I have to go through a lot mentally to get there. But I would say that whether it's the purpose of the business or it's the purpose of how I engage with others, I always think about the other person. I don't know whether that's also because I am a twin. All my life, it's about sharing. All my life, it's not been about one. It's always been about we, and it's about the collective. And therefore, for me, the collective is very important. It is how does everybody win? Is it a win-win for all? It shouldn't be a win-lose. That for me, it just jars in my mind.
You come across as someone who's very deliberate, heart in the right place, soft spoken. What does being frustrated and angry look like for you, for your colleagues?
I don't think I've ever kind of raised
Lost
my
your temper?
voice or lost my temper with anybody. So much so that if I did, I think they'd know that there's a problem. It's just the way I am. I just feel that very little is achieved through anger. I feel that the better outcomes come when you can actually communicate better with the other individual. So for me, communication is high on the ways to diffuse situations, and I encourage that. Where can you have open adult conversations for anything that's on anybody's mind?
When was the last time that you were truly down, and how did you motivate yourself through those days?
I think when I was truly down was really when I started Waterfield, because I was just quite confused. Was I doing the right thing? Because particularly after the corporate sector job, the easiest thing would have been to go into another organization at a leadership level and to build my career at that point. To have stepped out of that entire, I should call it rat race, and to really try and find a new path, I would often question myself that did I do the right thing? And yeah, did I
So
do
what
the
was your
right thing?
motivation during that? What kept you going during those times?
The fact that I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing and that I was doing something which would be meaningful. I was creating a business model that didn't exist before, and it would be for the benefit of our clients at the end of the day, and potentially as an equity holder in the company, hopefully someday it will create some wealth for me as well. So it was a bunch of things that was just that I really believe very strongly in the business model, and I know that it will succeed. I have to be patient. I have to make sure that I get the right people as part of my journey. I need to be able to spend the time to articulate my vision, because I think that's the other thing that founders need to do in the early stages, because you've just got an idea. I just had an Excel spreadsheet and I was doing this and saying, okay, this is how we will grow. This is how we will invest. But to be able to communicate that vision and to say, this is the big picture. This is what we can become. This is what we all need to do together. Those are the things that kind of kept me going. That it's like striving for making sure that you wouldn't fail. And I don't know how better to explain that, or that
No, it's sometimes survival itself.
it's survival. Exactly, it's survival.
Is a chip on the shoulder,
and maybe I don't know whether it. And I think also, I don't know if ego is the right word, but the fact that I didn't want to let myself down, that I've taken this decision to become an entrepreneur and it's not going to work out. So in some ways, it's like you will work really hard to achieve what you have to. And maybe that was a lot of pressure I put on myself. Not that anybody externally put it on me, because everyone would say it was be happy at the end of the day. But for me, it was, I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it, and that I had it in me to have left Standard Chartered and to have embarked on something that I truly believe in, and to make that dream a reality. That's, for me, it was a lot of self-belief that come what may, no matter all the naysayers, doesn't matter who's saying what, I will make this work.
When you started Waterfield, and during these times, did you ever give yourself a get out card? Did you ever say that I'll try this for 2 years or 3 years, and if it doesn't work out, I'll take up another job? Or was it all in, no plan B?
It was all in, no plan B. It was all in.
First Principles is made possible with the efforts of a wonderful team. Rajiv CN, our resident sound engineer who mixes and masters our sound and audio, and Hari Krishna, who produces and researches the episodes. Also, at First Principles, we love feedback. So write to us, tell us what we can improve, guests we should invite, questions that you think we should be asking, even things you find annoying. We'll be sure to read it. You can write to us at fp@theken.com. By the way, I have a very important announcement coming. I think it should be there roughly within the next week or so regarding the First Principles podcast. But while I still have you here, if you love listening to First Principles, and if you haven't rated us yet on your favorite podcast streaming platform, please. On that plaintive note, I'm Rohin Dharmakumar, your host, and I'll see you next Thursday. Stay cool, stay safe.